Hello friends, welcome to episode 92 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
I'm Rob.
How are you doing, Rob?
You know, beyond the random situation that just occurred at the beginning of the show here, I thought I was off to a really good start.
Yeah,
so,
just a little technical difficulty that had us peeing a little before.
But I mean, come on, I called it. Like,
yeah,
it was the USB that threw us all down.
Rob connected two USB cables on the first try,
and they weren't USB-C.
And we thought this was either going to signal phenomenal luck or the end of our luck.
Exactly. So, but we're here, we're up, we're live, and things happen.
Yeah.
So we survived.
So, you have been playing video games from the very, very beginning, yeah?
Yes.
I mean,
like I had Pong.
Yeah, we're old. We're old. Like.
We're old.
So many kids nowadays, and they're like, "Oh yeah, video gaming started with the Xbox," and you're like, "No,
that's adorable.
Yeah,
that is adorable."
So
Let's see. I had Pong. Actually, I played Adventure on a orange and black screen, dual floppy drive with less than it had less than a meg of memory. This whole system.
Wow.
And I remember having and finding like the secrets and doing all the crazy stuff with that. So like I remember. Loading games that you had to type into your computer.
Yep.
And put on a cassette.
Yep.
And replay the cassette to be able to play the game.
Yes.
I remember that.
We are both that old. So we saw the emergence of like the video game RPG.
Yes.
Can you remember the first one you ever played?
Let's see.
Like the first one that was like a real RPG.
Graphical? Because the first ones that I played were all text.
Okay.
I remember I would go to I would go and get games from when we would go to these hardware swap meets, these computer shows, my dad and I. And I remember I would go to the shareware
swap meets.
Yeah, I would go to the shareware stations
just hearing that sentence.
Where these guys would have floppies just layered through their stuff, and that's where I got most of my first games. Was these shareware swap meets, and that's where I got my first copy of Doom. Was at one of those.
Yeah.
And Commander Keen and all those games.
Yeah.
But I want to say my first graphical game, and I'm honestly trying to remember the name of it because it involved time travel. But it was an RPG. It was clearly an RPG. And it was neat. The graphics were exceptionally simple. Looking back on it mentally, it had certain Myst elements to it. If you're, I know you're familiar with Myst, where there were some puzzles and something like that. But for the most part, it was dungeon crawly. Like you enter an area, you're exploring the area. You have certain commands that you can do.
Yeah.
But it was all text based. You had to type everything. You got a little bit of graphics, but it was all text otherwise. But
I think my first that really like struck home with me. I may be a little bit off on the chronology of it here, but I think the first Final Fantasy game, the NES, was probably my first like real RPG.
I never got to play fully the first Final Fantasy game. I got to watch a lot of people play it, but I never had it, so I never got to play it. Yeah,
it was great, and I think it really it impacted a lot of my formative years when I started getting into tabletop role playing games and stuff like that. I started seeing that it heavily influenced the stories that I would tell, the stories that I liked to consume and stuff like that. And I became a big fan of the Final Fantasy series to begin with. Like, and I saw like a post on Tumblr the other day, and it was like name the 5 most important games in your of your childhood, and I was like Final Fantasy 1, Final Fantasy 2, Final Fantasy 3, and Final Fantasy Tactics.
Tic-Tacs, yeah. I remember. I played Tactics. I remember that.
Tactics was amazing.
I played Final Fantasy.
The 5th one was Castlevania Symphony of the Night, in case anyone was wondering.
What was the one with not Midgard, but the first time that came together? Was 7?
7, yeah.
I played all the way through 7. I remember playing through all the way through that. I played through some of the other ones. I loved that they carried Sid through so many of them. He was one of my favorite characters, and seeing him always was like, oh, I've reached the point in the game that I like. Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for me, a lot of my RPGs were very straight line. Like, I played Zelda to close, and I loved playing Zelda. I did not have the golden edition like some people had, but I distinctly remember playing all the way through that. But most of my RPGs were different than yours. Like, I would have to say some of mine were like my BattleTech RPGs that I played. Like, I played Crescent Hawk's Revenge, and I considered that an RPG because of the way that the story went together.
Okay. You felt very drawn into it. You felt put in the shoes of the protagonist.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, very much so. And even some of the more side-scrolly games that were still RPGs at a time. Castlevania was very much an RPG in the way that its story was told. It just was linear. That was it. I mean, you were still building up a character in some of those things. I mean, you could say that Metroid isn't, but you were always building up to a level that was everything, effectively.
I think the role-playing game, what kind of defines them in and see, this is one of those things that I always kind of had a little bit of a tricky thing was, and this kind of leads into our main topic here, is that what defines a role-playing game in video games is different from what defines a role-playing game in the tabletop sense. And I mean, I grew up with tabletops, and so when the word RPG started getting thrown around for video games, some of the things that got defined as RPGs in video games had me kind of rolling my eyes. I'm like, this is nothing like Dungeons and Dragons. This is nothing like Palladium, It's like, you're not even playing a character you get to create. You're playing set characters, and because they have stats that level up and you can tinker with their equipment, suddenly it's an RPG.
Well, I mean, Ultima was kind of the one of the very first that was recognizable, where you built a character. And you had a class, and you were defined, and the story was a little different based upon who you were. And you kind of had to lean into those moments to get to see where they were going with those types of story, but really they were dungeon crawl. They were true D&D style, original D&D style games. It wasn't until much later where we had a more open world, maybe not as open world, but more open world where you could go back and forth to places like you did in Final Fantasy, where you could beat the game without doing everything and the side quests and things like that, where there was a linear progression, but at the same time, there were other stories to be told, little things and side things. And I think that's really where I saw the difference in RPGs is like, wait a second, what do you mean you did this thing? Oh yeah, if you go to this town and you go up this thing and talk to this girl, she'll say that she was looking for this flower. But then during this other part of the game, if you're in this certain quest and you go through this side chamber, there's a flower there that you can pick up and it becomes an item. Then when you go back to her, it gives it to her, but otherwise you can't sell it or do anything with it. But if you give it to her, this whole thing happens. You're like, how the hell? Where was that in the game?
Right. Like I played this game 4 times. I never found that.
Exactly.
No.
And that's really where those kind of aspects came from. And I think that really kind of helped push those extra storylines and gave people something else to look forward to. So I think that's where the idea of open world in games really started to blossom. And now we have things like The Witcher, Skyrim. You've got in MMOs where you can pretty much go wherever and do whatever you want.
Oh yeah.
That doesn't follow a main plot line. And I think that's kind of its own discussion to be had that we'll get to. But when we're talking about a open world game, we're talking about one that isn't a strict game on rails,
right?
Where you get to see a giant map and do things. Horizon Zero Dawn is a good example of that. And MMOs as a whole, for the most part, are that in spades.
But even we've talked about The Division 2 is a game we play. That's I mean, it's a little directed in that their zones kind of have difficulty to them that you kind of want to start in a certain area and go a certain way. But there's nothing saying you have to do A then B then C. You can technically skip directly to C if you want. Things like that. And I think that also kind of goes in the open worlds. What it does is it puts the choice in the hands of the players,
right?
Rather than either the game or the game master that is telling the story. And I think that's the main thing that those have in common between tabletop RPGs and video games. is just the idea of not telling a story that's always constantly driving the action, but more sitting back and saying, "Hey, players, what do you guys want to do?"
Exactly.
There's a big world out there, you know.
Exactly, and so when you try and translate something like that to a tabletop RPG, because you don't have the graphics necessarily, because you don't have all of the information available to players, it can get kind of daunting to try and figure out, how do I do an open world design?
Oh, right.
How do I apply those rules over to a tabletop session or a virtual session, you know, in a way that makes sense? Now, there's obviously tools and stuff to help you graphically, you know, to present things. There's Anvil, World Anvil. So
World Anvil, yeah.
Yeah, World Anvil, which is a really great tool. There's a lot of people who use that. Go take a look at it for being able to take maps and link data and information so that the players have a little bit more that they can get their hands on.
Yep.
It's a wonderful tool for that. And there's a few other. I mean, obviously D&D Beyond has assets within it that allow you to have, chunks of your story, progressed there, where you can post information. I do it for mine when I can remember. You're very diligent about it. I'm not so bad. Using Discord channels and things like that to be able to post stuff is great, but it still doesn't give you the actual teardown of what you need. What is the basic requirements? So one of the things that one of the reasons why I kind of picked this was I kind of wanted to do a little bit of a teardown with Sara, and give out some of the points that games really do well, and apply those to standard RPGs.
Yeah, it's not a one-to-one comparison by any means, but I think there's a lot of very valuable lessons that we can learn from our open world games, our favorite open world games like Skyrim, Morrowind, if you're old school, Oblivion, and a lot of other games like that. Even games like The Witcher, Assassin's Creed. There's a lot of valuable lessons there. I think probably the first one that I really like, that I think translates really well to tabletop, is the location-based storytelling.
Oh, yes.
And it's kind of something that I've done a bit in my own game. Like we've talked about how we've got all the little villages up in the Colovian Highlands where my game is currently taking place. And when I laid that out, my goal was essentially to give each little town a story.
Yes.
And so whenever it didn't matter where you went, wherever you went would have something going on.
Right. And that's reiterated in games that a lot of times the travel's not so much. Like in most MMOs, there's things along the way, but you can pretty much ride past those or just move to the next place. But when you get there, there are quest givers and people wandering on. It's an active area, but it's still a hub. It's not necessarily where the action's happening necessarily, but it is where you will start every time. And that's the concept of having a safe place from threats and challenges, but you'll still have events that change it. You'll still have mishaps or plot triggers that are going to occur there, so that the players don't have to make life and death decisions in that space.
Right.
They can sit back.
It's always home.
Exactly. And I think going along right with that is also the trusted locations. If you're going to meet someone at a location and you're getting there, that it might be a camp, it might be the edge of a cave, it might be, a dock or a boat that's waiting for you. You know that's a trusted location. It's another little home base, basically.
It's essentially your allies' home base.
Correct. But it's very clear in the way RPGs handle it, because you know who is a threat and who is not a threat immediately when you step up. And I think that's something that you can translate into a game. You can make that known to your players that, this is a safe space. It's how you present it. It's how calm it is to you, in the way that you're casual in discussion of what they can find and what's there. Sometimes if your players are getting a little too edgy, like they're waiting for something to jump out at them or something like that, you can just be like, this is a safe area, guys.
I think this is one of the great places to use music. Honestly, like I like to put on some real soothing music if I'm putting you guys in a position where you're in a safe place, Just something that sets the mood without me ever having to mention a word, that you're not in any danger, And I think it's really valuable, like, especially for groups that aren't looking for, intrigue and subterfuge in their games. Like, if you're trying to play a real, like a 4-color superhero style game, or just a very black and white adventurers and villains, style game, arguably it wouldn't really lend itself to something like Shadowrun, because the setting itself is super ambiguous and everybody's kind of a bad guy in a way. But I think, like, there's a value in storytelling in knowing that there are a distinct line of demarcation between your villains and your heroes. And I think the idea of having safe spaces where nothing bad is going to happen really lends itself to that.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say like it's an early trait of storytelling or something like that. Like, when you have young players, this is a good place to start. But I don't think it has anything to do with that.
No,
I think everything has to do with your setting.
It's a style and setting.
It's a style, but I think.
Choice, yeah.
But I do think it tends to make it feel a little bit easier as a storyteller to tell the story, because your players aren't constantly on edge, waiting for something. Like in Shadowrun, you can make your bar or wherever you're meeting your Johnson be known as a safe space by like having people come in and give up their weapons, and you always know that there's a professionalism with your Johnsons and things like that. You can kind of establish that to a degree. Or that your dock wagon space is, your dock that you go to is a safe space. You can create those in stories, just as they are in action movies. Even though hell is just outside the door, it doesn't mean that because the door is closed, you're a little bit safe.
Like the hotel in John Wick.
Exactly.
But even that.
They kind of broke their own rules there, but they changed. By that point, you're neck deep in the story.
Yeah.
You're prepared to flip the plot. And your characters are prepared because they're the ones who flipped it.
Right.
You broke the rule, you now know the consequences. No different than if in an MMO you steal from one of the guards. Mm-hmm. Sorry. So you're now hunted by the town.
Speaking of MMOs, though,
yes.
And you and I have been playing Elder Scrolls Online a little bit.
Just a little bit, yeah.
I'm old hat at it, so I'm kind of used to it. You're starting to get into it, though. And one of the things that I think that game, and I've seen a few other games do this really well, is the unified iconography.
Yes.
When you walk in, they have taken the time to establish that the Fighters Guild uses red banners with a sword pointing down on them.
Yep.
The Mages Guild is an eye inside of a star.
Yep.
And so when you see those icons, you know instantly what you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And little things like the bank and the blacksmith and stuff that all have their own icons and whatnot. But I think the importance that you draw from that into your tabletop games is making sure that groups have unified iconography.
Yes.
So when you say, like, okay, you walk into the town and, the building right before you is, 3 stories tall and made of carved granite, elaborate etchings on it with little carvings and such like that. Tall windows and long red banners with swords pointed down on them. Mm-hmm. All of your players, without you ever having said the words Fighters Guild,
know what it is.
Should know what they're looking at.
Right. Likewise, if they, roll up to an encampment and they see a bunch of tents, and one of the standards, on their way in is a giant green standard with a sword pointing down on it. Mm-hmm. Oh, what the hell's the Fighters Guild doing here?
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe it's a recruitment, maybe it's a different camp, maybe a fight's going on and they're the ones leading it. Now you know.
Mm-hmm. But it makes the world feel connected that way.
Exactly. So I think doing kind of universal iconography helps, but not only does it help you and your players, but it also helps tell the story of the area. Not everyone is highly educated. Not everyone who comes to this town instantaneously knows to ask somebody where a certain thing is. There aren't signs for everything outside of every door that's words. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, that kind of signage probably is and wasn't that common. Like, if you walk down the street and you want to know where the hospital is, there's usually a blue sign with a white symbol on it, and you're like, oh, that means there's a hospital nearby. The words underneath it usually tell me the distance and direction. It's things like that you have to go to the least common denominator. Foreigners will not always know where things are. And they don't even have to be that foreign. They could literally be 2 cities over, and they still don't know where things are.
Right.
So keep that in mind for your players doing the same thing. When you're dealing with the interaction on those people in the town, that's where we've kind of talked about before, is that you'll always have, individuals that are just milling around, but it's up to you as the storyteller to direct them to the NPCs that are important. In games, they put a little diamond over their head or something, and you know that that's the person that they can talk to.
Right. Or my favorite thing is like in MMOs and like even in Skyrim. Like this is the city of Falkreath. Oh, those 4 buildings over there? That's the city?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, there's only one blacksmith in town. If you need blacksmithing supplies, guess where you're going, But like in tabletop RPGs, you don't necessarily need to do that. Or do you?
Well, I think one of the things you brought up today earlier without realizing it is that one of the things as a storyteller you can do to add life to that is have someone hawking. Like, maybe there's a young lad outside of the blacksmith shop talking up the finest of the armors and pointing out weak links in people's chainmail that's falling off, and and now he can direct them to Falgar, the local blacksmith.
Or I dare say you don't even need to, because if they say I want to go to a blacksmith, guess who that blacksmith's going to be? Sure, you've got infinite selection. There's blacksmiths all over there. We pick the 3rd one on the left. Cool, it's Falgar.
Yeah. Exactly.
But the important thing is that first off, bring life to your NPCs. It may seem like simple blacksmith is not somebody that you're going to need to really pour some character into, but I encourage you to, make that shopping experience a role-playing experience. Make it a fun thing. Give them some personality. Give them something to complain about or something to compliment them on, or a flamboyant personality in some way, So when they come back to this place later and they're like, we need to go to the blacksmith, we're going to Falgar's,
Sorry, I just saw Nox's thing, and I agree. It's a neat thing that you could do, and I've seen it a few times.
One town where one guy has 5 different jobs.
And he's just a different person. You're like, aren't you?
There was an episode of Avatar that did that.
Yeah, where the guy literally just changes hats, and he's
nope,
like,
that was my brother.
It was a swamp, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
But have recurring NPCs, and I think that's the big important thing. So like when I write down my towns, typically I go through and I pre-prep a handful of NPCs for you guys, a couple of common professions, and then like 5 other random names that are just there. Okay, now this helps with 2 things. First off, you jerks always ask me what's this NPC's name, and I have the answer.
It's true.
I have the answer because I know you're going to ask. And just have a little snippet of personality for them and stuff like that. But like if you guys say, okay, well, we're going to go and buy maps, well, I already know that there's a general goods store, there's a cartographer or whatever that's going to have those maps, and I already have that NPC's name written down. And you really don't need to do much more than that. Like, you don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of, like, what's their inventory or what does their shop even look like. But just have the NPC, give them a name, give them a snippet of personality, and just be prepared. If they look for blacksmithing supplies, have a blacksmith. If they were going to the tavern, have the innkeeper.
Yeah.
Have what the tavern looks like. All taverns need personality. They're characters in and of themselves.
Yeah.
But have these locations ready and flesh them out just enough to make them characters in and of themselves.
Right.
And so when your characters go there, they'll be memorable and they will go back.
Correct. And that's part of that home base is that your reoccurring characters have certain tropes about them. And if they remember those tropes, it helps them. And it brings the life and reduces the pile that you have as a storyteller. Another good thing to do is just have a list of things that they're working on. So that they're not just waiting for the players to show up. if it's a blacksmith, maybe he's working on something, working on a sword or a locket or an existing job that he's got to do. So he has a drive. He's not just waiting around for them. He's hammering something like, hey, we need you to take care of it. It's like, I'm currently working on something, dude. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you want? What do you.
So it just occurred to me about making your NPCs memorable. Mm-hmm. Is your favorite NPC from The Division 2?
Oh, God.
He's a weapon vendor. Can you tell me his name?
No.
Neither can I.
Nope.
But what does he do? What does he say, Rob?
Whenever you're done with him, he always says, that just filled up my inventory, and slurps his coffee. And I want to shoot him every damn time.
Every single time. But you remember that.
Yep.
It is an interesting character trait.
Yep.
Whether it annoys you or not.
Correct.
It is an interesting and memorable character trait.
Yep. Agreed.
And that is a valuable lesson from video games right there.
Yep. So I think this is as good as a place as any to kind of break this apart, because we're talking about location, and you kind of made a point that it really was a good place, was that there's kind of two views to this, and that is when your story goes theme park or character-driven.
Yes, yeah, and I think when you start talking about location-based storytelling,
right?
Every place has a story. You break off from your quest hub. Mm-hmm. You go to either location A, location B, or location C, and when you get there, something will be going on that is specific to that location.
Right.
Oh, thank goodness, a hero is here to save us because, boy, is things messed up, and you're now our savior. And so that's the video game way of doing it. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be so dramatic and in your face in a tabletop game, but I think it's valuable that every place has kind of a thing going on. And you may not be, the big darn savior, but it does then beg the question of, when you start writing these location-based things, do you do it as a theme park or do you do it character-driven?
So theme park, and we're talking we're going far to one direction.
Right. So the extreme theme park
is where you've got an open world, but each location is not dependent on the character. The character could literally be, as I put it earlier,
a lampshade with a hand grenade.
Because they could solve the problem just as easily as you can. It doesn't matter what your personality is. It doesn't matter what your background is. They don't care. Like, oh, you're just another grunt. Here, get in there and grind.
There is nothing tying your specific character to that plot. You just happen to be the right person at the right time to solve their problems.
Right. Or solve a problem within the list of litany of things that you may not be able to solve all of.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's no expectation that you're going to solve everything, but this one particular thing will make what they're doing is easier, and therefore make a change in the area.
And probably from the theme park perspective, that problem was going on before you got there, and if you don't do anything to affect it directly, will be going on after you leave.
Yeah. On the other hand, you have a character-driven, which is on the far other side of the scale, where your characters have histories. They're attached to things, and they literally have effects. For instance, your father was is the master of arms at this other place. So when you go there, your dad's there. That changes that location.
Right.
It makes it personal for that character. No different than if the group, like in 7C, are musketeers. Granted, they're part of a group, but they're also gaining affluence and changing when they go to areas. That affects everything about that. And therefore, now, instead of it just being a location that they show up at and have a little bit of an effect, they are directly involved in the plot and effects that happen there and are tied to it.
So the big thing you want to, when you're making location based plots and stuff like that, if you are going to go ahead and do things that way, is you need to figure out, and I don't think there's really a right or wrong answer to this.
No.
It's just it's more of a personal thing. Just something you should probably be conscious of is where in the theme park versus character background are you going with your plot?
Yep.
How much do you want to tie it specifically to the characters? How much do you want to just leave it very open that the characters just happen to be wandering into?
Right. There are midpoints to this conversation.
Sure.
Obviously, there's nothing to say that you can't have some of your players who are who are part of a theme park, and maybe like 2 of your players who are really involved, and they're actually part of the plot, and maybe that's just the dynamic of your group. But I think overall, you're going to lean one direction or the other within a story. But I think discovering how your players like to play will determine that a lot, and then determine the investment that you really want to put into that.
Yes, exactly. I think the main complication with making it more character-driven is that the characters tend to start personalizing it then. Well, because it is personal. I mean, you start bringing in aspects of characters' backgrounds and such that you're going to make it more personal, and it makes the world feel a lot smaller. At that point, it makes things feel a lot more pinpoint and pressure. That they personally need to deal with things. I think theme parking things allows them a little more choice. It makes the world feel a lot more open.
Yes, I don't want to say that it's easier, but I tend to believe theme parking is much easier if you tend to have a very flexible group that is coming in and out. Maybe you have people who don't show up at certain times, because then if the group is down 3 people and the group's like, yeah, we really don't want to go do that thing without them. What else could we do tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we still have that thing involving the thieves. Oh, yeah, let's go handle that.
I mean, the obvious con of leaning too far into theme park, though, is that you end up with disaffected players.
Yes.
I mean, why do we care?
Yeah.
Let's move on. This doesn't involve us. Let's go.
Exactly. Exactly.
And maybe sometimes that's an answer. Sometimes that's an answer. But, if you don't throw at least a little personal hook in there, you're going to end up with characters going like, oh, gee, that's a really sad story you just told me. Anyway, we got to go.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is how much do they affect the setting around them? They may not be personally involved, but the setting may keep evolving. For instance, maybe the area is downtrodden, and because bandits are everywhere, and after clearing through a bunch of the bandit quests, the area is really not so bad, and now there's more merchants and things like that. It doesn't necessarily make it personal, but it definitely shows reward.
Sure. So we want to talk about pacing a little bit?
Yeah, we can move into pacing. I mean, we skipped over a small section, but I think we could come back to that.
Yeah.
So,
all right. So, I think the reason we bring this up is because it kind of branches off of the whole discussion of your, of how to structure your plots, is then how to pace your plots. Is allowing the players to set that pace.
Correct.
So when, kind of branching off of what we're talking about the theme park, is that with an open world style game like this, you put the power of progressing the plot. Oh, that's a lot of P words.
It's a lot of P's.
Put the power of progressing the plot in a pickled pack
progressively with the players.
Yes, with the players.
Perpetuating the.
Nope,
can't do it.
We're not going to do it.
No, we're not going to do it.
It's basically putting that power in the hands of the players to advance the plot. So they know they can kind of like, again, if you've established that home base location, they can just go back and chill if they want to.
Yeah.
If they want to, look, we're going to take a week to just make some potions.
Yeah.
10-dar gear.
Do some crafting.
I'm going to go visit my wife.
Yeah.
On the farm. Make sure she's okay.
Right. I'm going to make some food. We're going to work on this kind of stuff, because they know that the plot will still be there when they're ready for it. And some game sessions, they can just enjoy a safe space even. Not necessarily their home base, but they know that this is a safe zone so that they can take a personal break. I mean... Yeah. I think Critical Role does this really well.
Critical Role does this exceptionally well, yeah.
And they know when they're at a pause, and that the players can then explore they can have discussions about what just happened in character. They can talk about the conflicts of those moments. They can bring up things that they've discovered, or where things are going with things.
Or even just take some time to reveal some backstory to one another.
Exactly.
Okay, so who's on watch right now?
Right.
Oh, you two? Okay, cool. Is there anything you want to do?
Exactly.
I walk up to him and I say, hey, you mentioned this earlier. What's going on with that? And then a 45-minute 45 minutes in Critical Role. I don't know if you want to do this in your tabletop game. Respect your players' time, but
I think some of the players in both of our games over time have had some inter-party discussion that's gone for a little while.
Yeah. I think
surprisingly.
Heck, me and Memnon in your last game.
Very much so. Very much so.
And we had a whole discussion about teleportation and that sort of, It was great though.
But it allows those save zones are not just for the players. They're literally for you to take a breath, review a few things, listen a little to what they're doing, and enjoy your players' enjoyment.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I think some of the best times have been had when you have those quiet moments and like the storyteller doesn't have to say anything for 15 whole minutes. You know, that's really nice. Because I've been in some games where I've had to drag the players through, and I'm like, okay, what do you guys want to do?
Yeah.
All right, well, let me give some more narration since you guys aren't going to talk. And it gets exhausting.
It does.
For a little bit.
It can be.
If you can get your characters into a safe space where they can just open up with each other, just role play amongst themselves, man, take that as the gift that it is. It is great. So then you've got your reward system.
Yeah, and I know we kind of went back and forth about this first part, which is that one of the things that games do technically really well is they put the reward in the front. You know effectively what you're going to get.
If you do this quest, you will receive this magical battle axe.
Or this other option. Or the NPC will literally tell you, like, oh, I'll give you all the gold in my pocket. It's not much, but it's the best I can do. And so you know you're going to get a gold reward out of it. Or they're telling you, like, oh, yeah, we need you to retrieve this relic, but there's probably a lot of other stuff down there. You're welcome to any of it, you know, kind of a thing. I just need this one thing.
And rewards don't have to be tangible either.
Correct.
Like, they can be things like, oh, well, yeah, I'd love to let you through this gate, but there's a marauding monster on the other side of it. You take care of that monster, you can have as much safe passage up and down this road as you want.
Exactly. Or we'll definitely, we can't make you part of the guild, but we can definitely give you a writ. You know, and now you can work with the guild and get our discounts or something like that.
Sure.
Just as much as any of the nobles giving you a favor.
But
you know?
but the idea is put the reward out there so that it's not ambiguous at all what they're going to do. Is dangle the carrot, as Knox says. Yes.
Yeah, and it's not so much dangling the carrot to drag them into it, but it's setting yourself up even before you might write the adventure to go along with it, that your players have a direction and they have drive, and you can see that drive. You don't have to make that carrot giant. You just need to make it available to them so that they can immediately say, yeah, let's go do that thing. And now you're like, okay, now I know where these players are going to go and how interested they are in it.
Well, not only that, but it also puts a lot of power in the hands of the players to be able to strategize. You know, if they know that there's a reward that they can get that may be a good solution for another problem that they're having, now suddenly they're like, well, shoot, we do A to get the thing and then use the thing to do B.
Yeah.
Like, that's easy. Now we know exactly where we're going. And then watching them do that, you as the storyteller get to say, well, cool, I need to write A, and I don't have to write B until next week.
Exactly.
I've got some time.
Reducing the numbers or supplies for something else. So now that they know the big bad guy is not going to have the thing because you just removed it from play by doing this side quest. But at the same time, the one part that I'm going to say is don't do, at least not too often, your princess is in another castle. When you present something as a reward, as a thing that's going to be there at the end, don't take it away without there being other rewards that were received. I mean, if it's a perceived end, and then you take it, you're cliffhanging, and now the players are concerned because they don't necessarily know what's next.
I kind of did that at the end of my last game. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you reward blocked.
Yeah, it was. As I said to you earlier, it was a moment of me reading the room, and the room was in a distinct mood of, okay, we've been playing forever. Let's quit for the night, please.
Yep.
And I didn't want to hold you guys any longer to tack on the scene that I had at the end of it. So I thought, I can just do this at the beginning of the next game, and I ended the game, but I did not realize that soured the reward you guys had. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice knocks. The
Peanuts football. Suffice to say, there will be payoff for it. Just didn't give it to you at the end of last game.
I am certain we will see something at the end of it. The other thing is the finish line is not necessarily the reward. Making sure that you have victory conditions that are clear.
Yes.
I love that about one thing about games is that you look at the boss's life. You watch it go down. You know that when the boss's life goes down, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to die, but you know that the fight is over.
Well, right, but not only that, but take our experience with Ghost Recon Wildlands.
Yep, perfect.
Here is the list of drug lords you will be taking down.
Right.
when you eliminate all of these drug lords, you will get to take down the Kingpin drug lord.
Right. Or you only need this many to be able to get enough intel to find his location, but there's a benefit to doing the rest.
Right. But the fact is they gave us milestones, they gave us clear victory conditions, and we knew what we were working for. Even we were getting into all sorts of different missions, going all sorts of different places, flying all over the place, getting different things, but we never lost sight of, okay, in this zone is this boss, and when we kill this boss, and this boss, this other one will show up, and we need to take him down to get to the last guy.
Exactly.
You know? And so it doesn't need to be necessarily so convoluted in your tabletop game, but at least spelling out that, like, for instance, in my game, the Bandit King has 3 lieutenants.
Yep. You take care of those 3 lieutenant problems, however,
and he becomes a kitten.
Correct.
And you can easily topple his empire. So, yeah. It's a quick little victory condition that's pretty well spelled out for you guys, you know. Critical Role Season 1 did this really well.
Okay.
In fact, twice, believe it or not.
Okay.
The first major arc in the game was the Chroma Conclave.
Okay.
And 5 chromatic dragons all working together attacked Exandria. And they took a little bit to kind of regroup from the initial attacks and stuff like that, and it was put forth to them that if they collected the vestiges of Divergence, these powerful magical artifacts, they would be equipped enough to fight these dragons.
Right.
And they were essentially given a shopping list of these different artifacts.
Pretty straightforward.
Get all the artifacts, and when you feel ready, go fight the dragons.
Yep.
And then it moved on where the Vecna plotline came in, and you have Vecna, who is attempting to ascend to godhood and basically take the place of the current goddess of death. And even that kind of had a thing because they had to get the favor of a bunch of different gods to be able to do anything to him because he was a demigod.
Yep.
You know, and to stop him from ascending. So there was these 3 spears essentially that they needed to make. And so there was these quests they had to go on. They're like, we're not going to be able to stop him from ascending to godhood without these things. 1, 2, 3. You know, easy victory conditions.
So having those clear-cut definitions let the players know right where they had to head for the next thing. And when something was a problem, if they couldn't get something.
Yeah. Exactly.
So
exactly.
The kind of thing that I tacked on the end, which I thought was kind of came out of it, is that almost every game has a tutorial at the beginning.
Yeah.
When you make your character, you get to play and do all of the things. Like, shoot me with your bow. That's pretty good. You know, now try and dodge this. You know, you get to play your character. There's nothing to say that you couldn't do that at a tabletop for people who have never played the system.
How many times have you wanted something like that before getting into an RPG system?
How many times have we done it for some of our players?
Yeah, we have, yeah.
I mean, I know you did it for my wife when she was starting out as a assassin. She's like, I don't really understand the dice mechanics behind this or want to do things. Sometimes it's as simple as, hey, here's your quick card of things that you do, you know, so that you know what your action economy is. And there's nothing to say you couldn't do that space both outside of continuity of your game, but also still in session. You know, whether it's 0 or 1, depending on how you look at it, whether it's your milk run that you're doing, but it's out of continuity and they're able to do what they want. But at the end, if they feel something's out of sorts with their character or not quite what they want, let them fix it.
Yep.
Because you're just in tutorial mode, effectively.
Yeah. I let you guys revamp your characters up till, like, I think level 4 or something like that. I gave you a whole level where you were just like, look, we've had 5 game sessions, you know.
This sucks.
How do you feel?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. I love that flexibility. There's no reason you shouldn't. I mean, let people. Yeah. It's a story. Let people enjoy the game.
Yeah, just let them respec, whatever.
Yeah, if they want their eyes to be blue instead of green, that's fine.
it says gray eyes, but they're really blue.
Yes. I'd like to get to these questions because they're really good, and I want to watch the time a little bit on this. So,
some phenomenal questions here. All right,
where do you want to start?
You know, Hulavoo shoots his questions so infrequently
Okay.
They're always so good.
All right, let's do this.
So Hulavu asks, one of the things a computer does well is automate the player management, e.g. encumbrance, inventory, money,
Sure.
and environment, e.g. mundane items, climate. How can we implement these types of mechanics in our games in a way that is, 1, is not overbearing, and 2, drives the story forward? Obviously, you cannot implement all the mechanics all the time, so do you have suggestions for when to use different mechanics?
I always feel like encumbrance and inventory and money are there when the players want an additional challenge. So, like, in some games, you can crank up the difficulty, whether that changes, like, you know, your crit range or how well you can hit, or, you know, whether or not, you know, you have auto clutch because you're driving or whatever. You know, those types of things. Players, I think you have to, at a tabletop game, you kind of have to gauge where they're at with the system.
Yeah.
And decide whether or not they want an additional challenge. At that point, you're flexible to do what you want with those and gauge their levels. I mean, I know there was actually someone's write-up where they simply said, like, you can have, you know, one weapon in each hand, you know, or one, you know, weapon / melee in each hand, whether it's a shield or shield, and then one on your back. And that was it. Like, that was your weapon total. You could then have, you know, a pouch for money, which was unlimited effectively, and an unlimited spell components pouch. But beyond that, you had one pack, which was your adventurer's pack. That was it. You weren't allowed to carry the whole world on you. If you wanted something else, you had to have a pack animal or a cart. And I was like, okay, that's a pretty simple encumbrance system that keeps the weights down. It doesn't seem like it's anything else. Armor basically just has its basic problems.
Yeah, sure.
But other than that, it's not like you have 4 sets of armor and, you know, 3 helms and whatever sitting around. You've got to be, you know, design yourself around that.
But yeah, I think it's really up to, you know, the players really how deep they want to go into something like that. Because, like, I like to think I would like that style game, but I don't think I would.
Yeah, I think it gets too deep, and I think those mechanics can get challenging. I have seen a couple of write-ups where people say the only time that you come up with that is like you have a prep moment at the beginning of the adventure, because you actually start in res. Yeah. So before in res, you look at your players and say, okay, you were climbing up the mountain, blah, 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 blah. What gear do you have? And then they list out the things that they brought with them on that particular adventure out of their stuff.
Okay.
Because they know what's going on, and they're starting in res. You know,
in media res.
Yeah. And in this case, like, I kind of like that idea, but I also still think that eats up time of storytelling.
Yeah, I tend to think so too. And I've rarely ran into a situation where I wished that I had done micromanagement of encumbrance and stuff like that when I hadn't. Yeah.
I think it muddles the game for most of the styles that I tend to, the storytelling that I tend to do.
As for mechanics like you know, climate, and rain and stuff like that, I think that the general rule I go on is you can either have a simple encounter that is combat heavy, or you can have a complicated encounter where it's like raining or dark or something like that, where you've got an added difficulty measure, but you have to tone the encounter down at that point, because your combat starts turning into a slog when like you've got 8 opponents and it's dark and it's raining, so like everything is at disadvantage, and the archer can't hit anything because you know, the wind is blowing their arrows all around and stuff like that. And it tends to start getting into a slog. What you can do, though, is you can build a small, tidy encounter that would be like a medium difficulty encounter ordinarily, a minor speed bump for you guys, but add the twist. Almost consider it an extra combatant.
Yeah.
So, like, you can have 5 assassins, or you can have 3 assassins and darkness.
Or you can have, you know, a chase with, you know, 4 guards who you're chasing in a carriage that you have to catch, you know. Or you could have 3 or 2 with the carriage, and you're riding through a burning forest.
Yes, exactly.
You know, or through a war zone. You're chasing someone down through the trenches. that's a hard chase on its own.
Yeah.
Now you're doing it through an active battle that you're not involved in, Yeah,
I think my main takeaway from this is, make sure you tone it down if you're going to add in additional stuff, and also I would say keep it for dramatic purposes.
Always.
Yeah. Like I think an occasional the big bad guy being a fight is cool. Mm-hmm. Big bad guy fight in a raging storm where you can only see things every third turn when the lightning flashes.
Yeah. Or, maybe you guys are all in a keep and outside it's storming horribly and you take the fight out onto the ramparts.
Right.
And now the thunder and lightning changes the whole fight.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
But just do that one. Mm-hmm. That's it. I don't want every fight to be that.
Right, exactly.
So, unless you're going to have extreme weather conditions, I would say, keep most of your encounters in the middle 80% and don't worry about it.
Yep.
Use flowery descriptions of the weather at that point.
Yep. Knox had a question.
Yes.
With the projection allowing players to take the vagueness and tailor a highly personal storytelling experience for themselves, how can we better determine and filter what things are important to include, what isn't, when crafting our rich lore to draw upon?
With projection, allowing players to take vagueness and tailor a highly personal story. Okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
The mute protagonist.
Correct.
And you just project yourself upon them. I understand now. Okay. So you're talking like Gordon Freeman, from Half-Life 2, where he doesn't have a single line of dialogue in the entire time, and it's a first-person game, so everybody's looking directly at us, calling us Gordon, and telling us that, I better determine and filter what things are important to include and what isn't, crafting our rich lore to draw upon. That's a deep question.
It's a challenging question, and I think that when we're looking at games, the difference is that in all of those games, the protagonists always have an opinion of what the character is, who you as the character, you the player is, and I think developing that determines how you want to run your plot. Again, if the players aren't necessarily involved in the plot, the protagonist isn't going to recognize them. They aren't going to identify them or set a tone to them other than in a general sense. On the other hand, if it is a character-driven story, they're going to see their deeds. They're going to feel the repercussions of their actions and change, but it still doesn't, I don't think it changes the dialogue of how the villain already sees them, or the antagonist already sees them. The antagonist has had opinions since the beginning. Either you are the speed bump that is in the way, and they already have an opinion of who you are, regardless of how you project yourself. And so I go to Portal. From the beginning, GLaDOS had an opinion of who Shell was.
Okay.
It didn't matter whether you were nice to the gun drones or not.
Sure,
It didn't matter. They had an opinion that you were just like everybody else. And then as the story progresses, it goes through this antagonistic method to an aggressive, to a questioning of your intelligence, to you're just a fly on the wall that's really annoying to me, and instead I can't slap you, I'm just not going to deal with you anymore. Kind of a situation. And I think having your villain, your antagonist, however, be prepared to handle those on you're a thing kind of mentality definitely gives you an edge of working with that. The moment that your players start having this direct effect, a reputation, start building things, that's where it can get challenging. And that's where I think you have to start thinking more as your antagonist and where things are going. But I still think you would do the same for any of the lessers, the lieutenants or henchmen, however you'd want it. They're still going to have a base feeling about things that can change moment to moment. Of oh my God, this is the bad guy. These are the bad guys. We're going to go stop them. Oh wait, they have guns and we don't because they just disarmed us. Haha, I'm leaving. Those kind of things, or running away, or noticing they're too powerful, or even turncoating at certain times if it's a lieutenant that you're able to do that with. But again, keeping their observations simple, their responses simple.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for my reaction to this, though, I think the whole mute protagonist, now that I'm giving them some thought, is it's a cheap way out that video games take to make them universal experiences for everybody.
Right.
So that they can project onto a wide variety of potential players.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you need to do that in a tabletop game. I mean, we did talk a little bit about the theme parking and stuff like that, but like, I think if you do have a small number of players that that I don't really think that projecting upon a mute protagonist like that is really I don't think it's a thing. And I think if you are trying to do that to kind of make a universal experience that doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily personalized to the particular player, I think you're falling short as a storyteller.
I think you're not telling a full story. I think you're telling an adventure. And
you're telling a story.
I think it's a module at that point.
Yeah, you're telling a story at the character, not
right.
with
the
character.
You're hard theme parking is what you're doing at that point.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it's not the direction that we take as storytellers, and it's definitely a lighter approach by far.
Yeah, and I think that really brings it back to the whole lampshade with a hand grenade thing.
Yeah, like how far does your player, like where do you put the weight?
Mm-hmm.
And again, your protagonist is going to do that, and some of your other characters are going to do that. So,
all right. So Overwatch asks, in video games, open world storytelling can lean more into world building rather than a linear plot, in order to give the player an RPG experience. How do you strike a good balance between world building and storytelling if you are trying for a similar experience on the tabletop?
I think it's presentation.
Yeah.
I think it really has to do with presentation, because anyone can look at a tabletop game from a distance and say, this is just a linear RPG. Like, they don't have any control over this. He's just driving it. And that's classic railroading 101.
Yes.
On the other hand, if you are giving your players options, meaning like, the head of the town says this, but about, the players start talking about a dungeon that they were wanting to explore, or someone says, hey, there's this lore that we need to find, or hey, we've got this, this map, that gives them the availability to go and do what they want. And at that point, you are giving them abilities to stretch beyond the plot, the main plot. And handle it.
I think your storytelling and your world building should go definitely hand in hand. For instance, a lot of my players in my game don't really have like the deep understanding of Elder Scrolls lore that I do.
Right.
So it's important for me to give them opportunities to learn that lore in game. So for instance, one of my main NPCs has asked them to go find a bunch of these things called Welkin Stones, which are basically magical batteries.
Yep.
Explained the lore behind them, explained where they would be found, explained who created them and all the history behind them, and now everybody at my table understands who the ancient Aliads were. And they understand the significance of these things, and they understand you can't make more of them because we don't know how.
Right.
But what is this? That's a fetch quest.
Yeah.
It's a go into the dungeon and get these things fetch quest. But I've given them enough lore and world building with it that it helps from a storytelling standpoint, that the characters have a direction to go and a goal to accomplish, and a reward for accomplishing it. But also they understand the hows and whys of the world building underneath it. And that's what makes the complete experience behind it.
Yeah, now you're not just in a novella running around.
Yeah.
Following Harry Potter as he goes through his adventure. You're crafting your own story within it.
And then next time they come across Iliad ruins, they're like, oh, hey, guys, we could go in there.
Yeah.
And expect to find these things.
Right. Just as if you were in The Witcher and you see something new on your map and you're like, hey, I don't know what that place is, but I'm going to go explore it.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that answers the question. And we appreciate questions every week. We hope that you can come and join us on our Discord and continue with that.
Yeah.
Because we do really love these questions. My next week's topic, actually, that I picked is Palladium. I'm going to do a show spotlight on Robotech. So that should be a lot of fun. You can find us on Twitter at @SD_conclave, on Instagram at @SD_conclave, on Mixlr, like some of you are listening right now, at mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave, every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can find our Discord link. We posted it with our Twitter. Also, you can just come to our website at https://storytellerconclave.com.
We want to give a big shout-out to all of our Patreon members, especially Knox in the Box, Sam, Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion, and Veteran. Thank you so much for supporting the show month after month. If you're listening live, our pre-show music was by Arcane Anthems. You can find that at patreon.com/arcaneanthems. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find that at geefrogmusic.weebly.com. And our outro music, which you're hearing now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find that at soundcloud.com/midairmachine/tracks.
We'd like to thank our families, Vicky and Sean, who support us every time we do this show. All of our friends who played games with us and have supported us and definitely give us something to talk about. And you, our listeners. We love you.
We love you.
Good night.
Good night.